Hello and welcome to another Vectric YouTube live event. It's Todd, and it's hard to believe, but it was raining a second ago. It seems to have stopped just like that, and it's beautiful sunny out. I don't get the weather over here. It's all over the place. Anyway, thanks a lot for stopping by. I'll give you a little update on what's going on here in the UK. As you can see, we're still, from Vectric's point of view, we're still all working from home. Go in and out of the office on occasion when we need to be in there to do certain things, but we're still essentially working from home. And when it comes to lockdown here, we are now in step 3 of raising lockdown. So we only have one step left when hopefully it'll go away for a little bit, or at least forever, I hope, I guess. So right now, as of yesterday, the 17th, all restaurants were now open, so we can go out to eat if we want to. Pubs are open, which is great. Hospitality is all reopened now. Inside entertainment venues are open. You can meet with up to 30 people that you know outside if you want to. And inside you can have 6 people mixed from different households, which is great news for people who want to get together with family. And then, of course, some international travel's opened up, which is good for somebody like me who potentially might get back to Canada at some point, maybe this year if we're lucky. We'll see. So that's pretty much it. Like I always say, working from home. I do have a train that goes by every so often out back, so I apologize if that happens. Kids are at home that just arrived back from school, so that you never know what's going to happen with that. So far through these, nothing's really gone too wrong, so that's good. If the rain starts again, I'm sorry if that happens, but it might. You just never know. So if you've been here before, thank you very much for returning again. We always love having you. If you're new to this, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to present an event here with a guest who is already in the chat room already, ready to take your questions or comments about what he's going to present. And Becky is in the chat room as well to help you with any questions that Peter might not be able to answer or on my project, maybe even still. Please ask your questions. If we don't get to them, which we'll try to, if we don't get to them, then just put them in the comments below and we'll get to those as soon as we can after the event is done. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So let me start off with a little introduction about our guest here. His name is Peter Parfitt, and he has a YouTube channel called New Brit Workshop. Now, I just looked a few minutes before we started this event, and he's got 65,000 subscribers. That's amazing. Fantastic. That's really quite incredible, actually. I didn't know what to expect when I looked, and that blew my mind. So that's amazing. A little background about Peter, and seeing as Peter's listening, I'm really sorry if I mess any of this up, but I'll see if I can do it right. Okay, so the woodworking bug bit Peter early in his life. Back when he was 6 years old, his father gave him a small cutoff of wood and a long nail and sent him off to create something. When he came back, he presented his dad with a small radio. I'm a dad. I've got a 6-year-old son. If I send him off with a block of wood and a nail, and he came back with a radio, first of all, I would applaud him for his imagination. That's amazing. And second of all, I'd be super proud that I may have actually helped to plant that seed in him for a lifelong passion called woodworking. That'd be amazing. So Peter went from there to spending his younger years at home working with his dad, learning all about woodworking. He left there to go into the military, where when he was in the military, he traveled all over the world. And it didn't matter where he was, he always had a workshop of some sort set up where he would actually show other soldiers how to create woodworking projects, which that's pretty amazing in itself, quite a giving thing. During that time, he also did a lot of charity work and so on, making woodworking things for charity, and never kept any of the profits, always gave that back to the charities that he was making the stuff for, which again, very giving heart. And by the time we're done this, you're going to see exactly how that is, because he's given us an amazing amount of content to give away for free to you guys. So I'm pretty excited about that. So when Peter retired from the military, he made woodworking his lifelong passion, and he started a YouTube channel back in 2011. In 2015, he got his first CNC machine, which happened to be an X-Carve, and he's never looked back from there. Now he also has, and I'm pretty excited about this, because one of the places where he has some of his tools being sold in is a place that my dad and I used to go to a lot in Canada called Lee Valley Tools. So Peter has a tool that they sell, and also he has a product here that's being sold by Axe Minister Tools here in the UK. So that's pretty amazing. So you may not know it, but you may have already seen some of Peter's work. If you've been digging around the free projects that we give away at Vectric.com, you may have seen this. No, it's always hard to get the finger right. That way, there. A tool tray that he gave away for free. The actual pattern you can download through your V&Co account. You can make this. This actually inspired me when he first gave it up, or when he first gave this away, to create a small tool tray for my small CNC that I had in Canada. So that affected me, and it's a nice idea and so on. Now, he went from there to actually being a presenter at one of our UK user group meetings back in 2019, sharing his story and sharing some of his tips about using a CNC and what he uses it for. And so it's obvious that he is quite a excellent craftsman. I forgot to mention that he actually has some pieces at 10 Downing Street and in several of our European capitals. He has pieces there, that's a pretty interesting thing. So what we're going to do, Peter has given us a pile of content to share with you today. And I kind of broken it up into 4-ish chunks. And so we're going to have Peter, me, and so on till the end. And we're going to see how that goes. So Peter, let's start off with your first chunk of video. Here we go.
My name is Peter Parfitt. I'm delighted to have been invited today by Vectric to take part in this YouTube live event. Now, just in case you don't know anything about me, I do make 1 or 2 YouTube videos about all sorts of things, including woodwork and sometimes including CNC. I have an X-Carve CNC, which you see just here. It's one of the smallest ones they make, but it's perfectly suitable for what I do. I use Vectric's Aspire. I did start with VCarve Pro, and I've been using Vectric's products for about 6 years now. Now, what I'm going to do today is run through a few little projects and give you just an indication, a feel for some of the things I've been up to. I hope also to be able to give you some tips, and that's what I'll start with shortly. Now, I know that some of the tips I give will be well known to the seasoned CNC users amongst you, but I know there are a number of newcomers and potential CNC users in the audience, so I really want to give them a bit of information too. Now, I don't intend to talk about doing simple signs or coat racks today, but I hope you'll enjoy what you see. Some of you may know that I design woodworking tools, and most of which are manufactured in this country, and they're manufactured on very clever CNC machines like these, and they need a lot of very clever people to run them too. Now, my wasteboard has a number of holes in it, as you can see, and the backing board, which is underneath, has a whole bunch of screw inserts. If you've not seen a screw insert before, they look something like that. And you can buy these from all sorts of places. Screwfix in the UK, eBay is probably a good place as well, wherever you are in the world. And so those are down under here. So when I want to hold something down, I've got these little screw clamps. That's what they look like. You can make up your own very easily. And those screw down into those screw inserts. And I can then trap whatever piece I'm working on with some of these homemade little clamping pieces. They're very simple. I actually made them on the CNC. They've got a long slot there, and you can see there's a little sort of notched area so that they can clamp down onto something and hold it in place. Because they're made of wood, it doesn't matter if you accidentally hit it with a tool either. Now, when I first started using a CNC, I always found it a bit difficult to work out how I could clamp my piece of wood, my job, down so that it was in the right orientation as far as the X and Y axes went, so I didn't have it skew-whiff. And it took me about a year to think of this, but I got hold of some brass dowel, and this is 4mm in diameter. And what I did was I put a 4mm cutter in my spindle. I then set it, drilling some holes. First of all, 8mm from the machine's home position in the Y direction, so all the way along there, because when you then put this into one of those holes, 8mm from the machine home, the outside there is actually 10mm from machine home. Okay? And then in this direction, I drilled some holes which were 8mm from the machine home in that direction. So therefore the outside of this hole here, the side of the peg, is 10mm from machine home. So that then means that when I put something in here like this corner here is 10mm in the Y direction, 10mm in the X direction from the machine's home. So that gives me an instant way of being able to set up the X and Y home positions for a job. I just add 10 to the X and Y hard home positions after it's been set. All I'm left then to do is to do the Z direction. And in order to do the Z direction, I made up this little brass object here. It consists of a circular piece of brass which is 15mm in depth. I've then attached that to a piece of brass angle. And what that allows me to do now is to use this in one of two ways, either this way up or on a larger piece, this way up, at the corner of the job, and I can then run a Z probe routine which puts the tool down onto there, and then knowing that that is 15mm in thickness, I've then got a mechanism for setting my Z home for the job. And that's as simple as that. And this little thing is a homemade job, very easy to make, but if you don't have that big round piece of brass, you can just take a piece of brass angle, as I've done here, and I've soldered on a little piece of brass on top. So that's an alternate way of doing it. Now, I mentioned my 4mm brass dowel. I actually have a lot of metal. I'd like to show you this little storage box I've made for my various bits of tubing and metal dowel and various other bits and pieces. Now, there are varying lengths. For example, in this area here, they're no more than about 30 centimeters long, whereas in this area here they're up to 1 meter long. And inside here I've got some tubing, and if I pull out this one here, you'll see what's going on. So there's a short piece of tubing, it fits down through this top, and as this is a short one, that then fits into a little recess just there like so, and which is at that level, so therefore when I drop these bits and pieces in, they don't fall through. And these are a little bit longer here, and then it gets longer still, and so on. And the tubes at the front are ordinary white plastic water waste pipe, and the tubes at the back, there's 3 of them, are black rainwater downpipes, guttering downpipes. Now, in order to get all the holes in the various pieces of wood, which are at different levels, I've used the CNC bridge. And saved it. So that's now saved, and that's just the drawing element of what I've done. I've now actually got to tell it to do a bit of CNC work. This is the top tray. I now need holes in all 7 of these places here, and I need the little cutout here. So I'm going to deal with the holes first of all. I'm going to highlight them all, like so. I'm now going to go to my toolpath menu, and I'm going to choose the profile toolpath, and I need to be cutting here at a depth of 18mm. That takes me safely through the material. Now my cutter is already selected, but I want a 1/4 inch or 6.35mm end mill. It's selected there. But if I were to press the select, I can choose from any one of the cutters which are already provided with the default program, or you can create cutters of your own. When you do that, you can specify some extra notes, and I've actually created this one. It says it's a 6.35mm 1/4 inch, and it's set up for wood, because I've now set up my parameters here of the feed rate and the plunge rate that I want this tool to operate at. And that's really important. If you were doing cutting in metal, you might want to have these a lot slower. Anyway, so I'm happy with that cutter. That's selected. And now you've got to then decide how you're going to use the drawings or the vectors that you've created here. I want this cutter to go around the inside because we're making holes. So that's as it's selected there. Now there's one thing that you really must make sure, and that is once the cutting comes towards completion, you don't want the piece in the middle, the cutout piece, start rattling around and get hit by the rotating tool. So you can add tabs. Now you go in here and you can say how many tabs you want. There are 2 for each hole. I'm going to close that, and my tabs are 2mm thick and 8mm long. And the only other thing I've got to do now is to give this first toolpath a name. So I'm going to call it top tray, or top level. I think when I actually did this the first time, I called it something completely different. Top level. And I then say what cutter. I'm going to say 635 end mill. So I now will save this toolpath eventually, and it's going to be called something realistic, so I can then remember, yes, it is that particular end mill. So there it is. The software is warning me I'm going to cut through the material. I'm happy with that. And if I preview this toolpath, you can now see those are my holes, and you can see the tabs here. So that's super. I can close that, but I want to save this as a toolpath. So I go save. And this is where you can now specify how the file is saved to suit your CNC. My CNC uses G-code, and it is the X-carve CNC. And Vectric know about the X-carve, and it's one of the options that you can take from all of these different CNC machines and so on. Anyway, so I'm happy, X-carve, G-code. So I'm going to save that, and it comes up with the same name I used before. I'm happy with that. Save. So I've now saved that. I can now close that dialog, and I can go back to my drawing. Deselect those holes they'd already done. I'm now looking at the tool tray. And for this one, I want a pocket toolpath. It's this one here. And this happens to have the right parameters here. I want the cut depth to be 8mm. My same cutter is selected, so I don't have to change the tool. There are some other parameters here I don't need to change. I just need to give this an appropriate name. So it's top tray. So I can call it top tray, and my same convention, 635 end mill. So I now know what tool it is I set this up for. And there is my little tool tray area. So that's done. I can close that, and I must now save this toolpath again in G-code, save toolpath. There it is, save. Now we're at the next level down, and that means that 2 of my circles, these 2, are going to be stop ends. But these 5 here will be holes again. So I've now got those 5 holes. That's fine. Unselect those. I'll select these 2 now. Now these are going to be slightly different. These are going to be the same profile toolpath selection, and this time, to guarantee the pipe can go into this hole, I'm going to actually have my profile on the line. It means the pipe can go down to the stop end, fit in it with no problem at all. No need for any tabs or anything like that, of course. And so I'm going to call this level 2 stop ends. And it's 635 end mill. So there we go. Calculate. And if I do preview, you can see now how that's going to work. And with it up this way, I think you can see just how it's working. Now, before Todd disconnects me from the conversation, I want you to look at this and have a guess at what you think it might be. Diameter is a particular diameter, thickness is a particular thickness. There it is.
Wow, that's a great first section. Lots of good stuff in there. So I'm going to pick out some of the things that I kind of think are kind of interesting, and then we'll go on to talk about what Peter, again, he's given us a lot of stuff to give away to you guys. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the files that he's given away for us to include in with the package of stuff that you can download at the end of all this. So first of all, the threaded insert thing into your wasteboard. Great idea. We have a couple small format CNC machines in the labs, in the office, and that's what they use, and those are brilliant for screwing down stuff, and like you said, using that with the wooden clamps and so on. That's perfect. The wooden clamps, those are great, and as you pointed out, if you hit a wooden clamp, it's way better than hitting something that's metal. So what he's done is he is given you the file that he used to cut his wooden clamps with. Now what's great about this is Peter tends to use his machine as just a tool in his shop. Just like any other tool he has, he uses it when he needs it, and then maybe the piece becomes part of a bigger project, or maybe there's some work to be done with a traditional woodworking technique. That's the same as with this. If you cut these from their side like they are there, you're still going to need to figure out a way to put the channel in the top of them so you can screw in the holder in there. I would love it if somebody could come up with a neat way to index these, and then you could actually put that little channel in with your CNC machine as well. That would be really kind of cool. Anyway, so that file is yours for free as well. Now, some of the things he mentioned which are really good is his 8mm or his brass pin system for finding the corner of his material. That's great in all kinds of different ways. One, or the biggest one for me, is that you can choose how many pins you want to put in there. So if you're worried that your machine is going to get close to a pin because it's cutting close to your material, you can remove a pin and put it farther up on your material. That way you're really not too worried about hitting that. That's a really neat idea. His two zero block ideas, I've seen the puck ones before. We use one at work, or in the labs, but also it has that piece of angle material on it, so you can clip it to the edge or the corner of your material. That's a neat idea. And then of course the real simple one, which is just a piece of angle with the flat piece on the top. If your CNC can have one of those added to it and it doesn't have it already, there's nothing worse than having to zero your machine or zero your tool off manually somewhere. It's that, yeah, once you have one of those touch plates, it's you never look back. It's fantastic. And the storage box, one thing that's neat about that is that when you showed the second level of the storage box, you can actually reuse that same set of vectors for the rest of it all the way down to the bottom just by selecting the different vectors that you want and applying the different toolpath strategies to it. Perfect. That's a great project. I love that one. And then of course, I'm not quite sure what that little plastic magnifying glass thing was at the end that he showed us, but I guess we'll figure that out a bit later. Okay, so let's go on to the next video from Peter.
Making a box joint is not easy to do on a CNC, and it is rather time consuming. So on the CNC, I made the jig that allows me to make these very quickly on my router table. This is the completed jig itself, and it runs on a pair of rails that fit in the grooves which are either side of my router table. Now, all the jigs that I've seen in the past have had this part here, which is where you hold your piece of wood that you're about to cut. That's been mobile. Well, I've decided to make mine static. And because this bit is static, we've got to somehow be able to create this arrangement here. Now, this piece is removable, and this is what I think makes this a unique idea. In order to create this, use a little jig, like so, and this can be located exactly on there, so it's in line with that opening, and the cuts can be made. And I've produced lots of little blanks like this, so I can have these for different size cutters. This one's for an 8mm cutter. I could have them for any size cutters that I wish. And all of these parts are terribly easy to make. And the way this works is quite simple. With the first piece, we're going to hold it up against the stop there. Move that over, like so. And we keep moving it over. Turn it around, put it on there. And then for this next piece, and then carry on as before with this one. There are two pieces which go together like so, and you would glue this up and then plane it off or sand it off. And if you do that on all four sides, put a channel in for the base, you then have quite a useful tray or whatever else it might become, a box and so on. Right, I'm now letting you into the secret world of my workshop drawers, well, of this drawer in particular. This drawer is my sort of CNC drawer. In there I've got an old notebook computer which just about does the job in the workshop, and that's on a little tray like this. And here I have all my various cutters. Now I made this with the CNC, and I'll make sure that the file for this is available to you. And underneath here I've got my sort of little hidey hole place where everything gets put to one side. A couple of things I want to show you here. I've mentioned these before. I've made all these little hold down things. Some have got this notch in them, some are just straight, and I keep a whole bunch of those in there. Now this little brush is really important. When you've done a bit of sign writing or whatever it might be, using a V cutter, sometimes you get tiny little hairs of wood left in there. Well, this brush has plastic hairs, and you just rub it quite vigorously across there. It doesn't do any harm to your actual carving, but what it does do, it removes the majority of those little hairy bits. And this is Cheap and Cheerful brush, which I bought from Axminster many years ago. Now there's my computer on its tray. Now on the underside here, using the CNC, I've made a recess to take a large metal washer. And this metal washer is magnetic. And in the centre there is a little 6mm hole. Now here, in the top of this little box, I've got 4 magnets which are flush with the surface, and I've got a 6mm brass dowel peg. And it means that I can locate this on here. It can rotate according to where I am. I can move this whole thing around if I like. And then it means that my computer can be at a comfortable angle when I'm operating the CNC. And those magnets are sufficient that if you knock this, it wouldn't come adrift at all. You've got to give it quite a reasonable little knock in order to get it off there. So there you are, a little nifty neato for you. Now I've just made a little gadget on the CNC, and I'm not going to take you through any part of how it was made whatsoever. But I'm mentioning it because sometimes people who've got a CNC think, well, what could I make next? Well, I'm just going to tell you what this is, and then you might go and make one. You can design it yourself. Now, you know those shopping trolleys where you've got to insert a coin? Well, if you do a Google search, whichever country in the world you're in, and find out the dimensions of the coins that your shopping trolleys favour, then you can make this piece the right diameter and the right thickness, and then have a little handle bit here, and then you can use this in a shopping trolley. I put a little hole in the end there so you have a piece of colourful string or something attached to it. If you're like me, you never seem to have a pound coin on you. We just have one of these in your wallet or in the car or whatever, and you know you can always get a shopping trolley. And so that's really cheap and cheerful, really easy to produce, and I'm not going to tell you how to go about it. It would be an insult. Our TV can be mounted on the wall, and you can buy, and they're quite expensive, they're sort of 45, 50 pounds, a sort of gadget, a hanging bracket thing that goes at the back of the TV to allow you to hang it on the wall. So this is what I've done. It's going to be about this size, that's about 250 millimeters square, and there are going to be 4 holes, one at each corner, which are 200 millimeters apart, and those will be for the 8mm bolts that will be fixed to the TV. And then there'll be 3 little slotted holes so that I can have 3 screws in a sort of triangular pattern, 1, 2, 3, screwed into the wall, and then this plate, which is then attached to the TV, can be lifted on and dropped down onto those screws, and it won't fall away because the screws are in the slots. In the Aspire program, I've started by saying, right, my piece of material is 250 millimeters square. And actually my material I'm using is a piece of aluminium. It's aluminium plate. It's 3 millimeters thick, and I bought it via Amazon, and it was just over £5. I've then positioned 4 holes, one at each corner, and those are 8.2 millimeters in diameter. And that allows the 8mm threaded bolts to go through those and then into the back of the TV. I've created 3 identical little slotted holes, and these start off with a 12mm diameter circle there, then a 5mm diameter circle up here, linking the two with a straight line and getting rid of the redundant parts of the 2 curves to make one entity, which is that shape. And I've then copied that to the other positions. I've then created tool paths, and I know it's not terribly clear from where you're looking, but the 4 holes are here, and then the 3 elongated slotted holes are there. Now, the particular tool I'm using is a 3mm end mill. I've set my cutting depth to 3.5 millimeters because I want to go all the way through the aluminium. I'm using a profile tool path, and I've set the actual tool parameters really, really modest. The reason is I've never cut aluminium before, and so, for example, my pass depth, I've got it at 0.1 millimeter. In other words, every time it's going to start making a cut, it's only going to go down by 0.1 of a millimeter. I've also said that my feed rate should be 0.5 millimeter a second, so it's not going to go too fast. And then my plunge rate, as it goes downwards to start the new part of the hole, is 0.1 millimeters a second, so it's plunging down very slowly. And I've set this up like this because, as I said, I've never done aluminium cutting before, and I really do want this to work well. I don't want it to struggle and make a bad job. And I've just done the trial fitting of the plate, and the 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, 4 at the back, which fix it onto the TV. In my case, these are at 200 millimeter centers. And then you can see the slotted holes here, which will correspond with some screws, which I'll fit on the wall behind me, where the TV's going to go. Now, with the screws and the washers sitting in the back of the plate, I've now tightened these screws up fully so that doesn't move, but that's not how we want it because it would be very difficult to get this on and off. So I'm going to back these off now by about 3/4 of a turn. And that now allows a little bit of wiggle room so that as the TV's offered up with this plate attached, that we can get these holes fixed and the whole thing in place. And all I have to do now is to lift the TV into position, and I can look down on my plate, line up the holes, then slide it down. And that's it. In position, ready to go.
Wow. When I said this was going to be packed jam full of stuff, I wasn't kidding. There's tons of stuff in there. First of all, Peter, that box joint rig that you made, that is pretty slick. And now the cat's out of the bag on that one. So yeah, that is really nice. If I had a router and I was going to make box joints, that certainly would be the way to do it. Anybody with a CNC does know how hard it is to create those kind of shapes or those joints on a CNC machine. It is difficult unless you've got ways to fixture your materials properly, but that is really quite slick. So thank you for sharing that with us. Of course, the tool tray that you had in your drawer of magic there, like I said earlier, if you're one of our Vectric customers, you can log into your V&Co account and download the plans for that, so you can make your own, which is really quite nice. And like I said, that's been around for a bit now, so you may have seen it. The plastic brush. Now we've got a few metal brushes in the lab, but not a plastic one. I think that's kind of unique, and you're right, that probably wouldn't scratch your wood at all. So that's something that we might have to keep an eye out for and take a look and see if we can find one of those. And you had tons of those clamps in there. So hey, if you're going to make them on your CNC, you may as well make a lot of them because you might use them, right? They're great to have around and they're really nice and handy to have. Peter has also given us the file for his Trolley token. I'll let you do what you want with that, but it'll be there for you in the downloadable pack of files we're going to give you. And then also the TV mount. Now, this is one of those things that I was just in Costco yesterday, and I was looking at the mounts because, of course, I love looking at the TVs there. And just for a static one like this, it was like 24 pounds. So that's like almost $30 American for just this static. And Peter just made one for, under a tenner, as they'd say over here, which is sounds funny saying that, but anyway, that's amazing. So if you have a piece of aluminum and you have a bit of time in your hands, you can make this right in your own shop, and that's pretty neat. So thank you for sharing that with us, Peter. So if you hadn't noticed, our logo kind of blocked part of it, but Peter uses a piece of software called the Universal G-Code Sender, and that's how he gets his G-code to his X-Carve machine. Well, some of you may have noticed when you're installing our software that you have the option to install a piece of software called VTransfer. And VTransfer is kind of the same sort of thing as the Universal G-Code Sender. But it opens up some of the options in our software that you may have seen but just didn't quite understand why they were there. So if you choose to install this when you're installing your software, then when you open up the your toolpath savings dialog, you'll see that at the bottom of that there's a little checkbox, and the little checkbox says output direct to your machine. Now sometimes that'll be grayed out because your post processor won't allow you to use that, but if it is there and it's usable, then you can, if you want to, and your CNC has the capabilities to hook up directly to your laptop, you can go right from our software right to VTransfer, right to your machine. It's just a seamless flow of stuff, and it works really, really well. Now, if you want to give it a shot and you haven't installed it, that's not a big deal. You can just reinstall your software and choose that option, or even better, bring up your Windows File Navigator or File Explorer and navigate over to your program files and into your software's file folder. And there you'll see a VTransfer setup file.exe. Just double click on that and it will install for you, and you can give it a shot and see what you think. It's worth knowing that it's there, so I just thought I'd point that out. Now, next is my favorite part of this whole thing, although it's all been great, but I'm really excited about this next bit. So I'm going to let Peter tell you all about it.
It's all very well being absolutely brilliant at making signs that say Fred Blogg's house or Charlie's coat rack or Fred's bedroom, whatever it might be. But how about making something as complicated as this? And so today I've challenged all the clever people at Vectric to try and make one of these. It's a shoehorn, and it's out of a solid piece of wood, and I've been making these for a while. I go about it the old-fashioned way. I rough it out on the CNC, but then do the real work by hand. Now, this is my shoehorn 3 file. It's my third attempt, in other words. And this time I've produced all of the profiles in one file, and they're in layers. Now, bearing in mind that my stock is not square, it's 35mm by 45, and as you look at it now, that's the 45, and the 35 goes into the Z direction, effectively, that way. And top 2 layers are the top view, which would have that 45 width, and it's got the Parf sign there. And if I now just and these are the other 2 profiles, and these are the side view. Now, I know that I haven't changed the dimensions of my job as far as this goes, but I have taken into account that line there is at the 35 point, so nothing's going to happen beyond there. And so there are the 2 profiles, one with the Parf on the left and the other with the Parf on the right, which allows me to cut both sides of the stock symmetrically. So I'm now just setting up the tool paths for each of those very simply, and then I'm going to run it. This basic file I'll make available to everyone. There won't be any tool paths because, of course, that is dependent on your particular CNC. But Aspire or VCarve Pro can give you the whole list of possible machines, and you'll be able to generate your tool paths based on that. And I'm just saving this tool path profile cut now. And this is the second one. This is with the Parf on the right. If I select the other one, let me just close that, and I'm going to do a preview. And that's the one with Parf on the left, and this one has Parf on the right. And so for that top 2, this last one, Parf is on the right and it does the profile. The one before that, Parf was on the left, it did the profile. And the next 2 I'm going to do are with Parf facing away from me, and it's going to do that profile. And then this is going to be rotated like so, and it's going to do this other profile. So that means we've got profile cuts on all 4 faces. And there you can see the preview of the side view with Parf on the left. Now remember, we have made a little fib, and we haven't told Aspire that the piece of wood is actually only 35 wide rather than the 45 it thinks it is. So it looks as though there's more material above than there really will be. And I'll do the same profile with that flipped. So I've called this one Shoehorn 3 Final Side Parf Left. Parf is here, and the other one will be Parf Right. And there's the final preview, side view with Parf on the right. Now you can see I've got my list of tool paths here. There are 4 of them, so it's 1 for each face, and each of these tool paths is descriptive. Shoehorn 3, final top, final side, whatever it might be, Parf on the left or Parf on the right. So I know exactly where my piece of stock should be for each of those tool paths. I can now flip this, and we're going to do the mirror image of this but on the other side. So there's Parf there. We're now putting Parf on the right, we're doing the other side. And note I have enough of these places so that I can locate this properly. So that's secure. I can now run the other profile, which is the top with Parf on the right, because that's where Parf is, just there underneath there. And that's the second one done, and you can probably see the shape of both the top and bottom view. Parf's up there. And now all I've got to do is flip this onto a side, and do those 2 side cuts. Now both the side cuts will be done with path facing up the CNC. So it'll be on its side with path that way or path that way. So I'm going to do path on the left first, and now I'm going to choose the side profile that says side path left. And there we have that finished bit of work, and this is where the handwork starts. Well, I suppose handwork starts by taking it to the bandsaw. Right, there's our path here, and you can see where we've gone with these profiles, and it's just now a question of cutting through, following the profiles, and then sanding it off. And having trimmed off the other 2 sides, I can then start shaping. And once I've finished doing the sanding, I've done the filler here, let it go off, then sanded that clear, and give it a little bit of Osmo oil. And there's the finished piece. Now, how did those clever people at Vectric get on? I'm sure they've done a better job than me.
I don't know about better, but anyway. When Peter first mentioned this to me, I was really excited about this whole challenge. I love doing stuff like this, not to prove a point, just because it's just fun to try and flex your modeling muscle and see if you can make software do things that might be difficult for some people. But anyway, so thanks to Peter, he has given me some pictures to go with. Now, a shoehorn, I don't remember a shoehorn, ever seeing one. Maybe when I was a kid, little plastic ones you might get at a shoe store maybe. And even longer ones I may have seen, maybe my grandparents may have had one, but I've never had a need for one. Not yet anyway, maybe I will. So I really didn't know what to do. So Peter's pictures were a super help. And then also he sent along the file, like he had said in his video, with all of the different layers in there, so I could go ahead and get an idea of what he was doing and maybe just the general shape of things overall. So I did come up with a shoehorn in the end. Now I pulled a lot of tricks, a lot of modeling techniques, a lot of sort of ideas that we've used for other projects and so on. But there's no way that I can go in depth into all that stuff during this video. So I'm going to touch on a few things. And if you feel like you would like me to do a deep dive into any of this stuff, then maybe what we could do is if you give it a thumbs up, this video a thumbs up, and maybe make a comment below that you would like to see me do, or like us to show you how to create a spoon or another shoehorn, or get into something like this a little more in depth, then we'll take that into consideration for our video in the future. So don't forget, thumbs up, and just ask for it down below, okay? So let's go ahead and hop into the software, and I'll show you what I did. Now again, I can't go into all the stuff, so I'm just going to go on some of the high points. But you're going to have the file, so if you have a Spire, you can jump right in, you can have a look for yourself. As always, all of our files, when you open them up, you're going to have the general notes here. Make sure that you read and understand these, look over all the tooling, make sure that everything is safe and appropriate for your machine. Safety first, we don't want anybody to get hurt, and we'll just click OK. So let's have a look at my job setup for this. Now, there's some important things I want to point out here for you. So Peter had used that sort of a squarish block of material, and I didn't want to do that. I'm cutting on a 3-axis CNC, only wanted to do a double-sided flip. I didn't want to index it four sides. I didn't think that was necessary for what I was doing. So what I did was I took his shape and I angled it so that it fit inside of a piece of stock that I had in the labs, and that happened to be a piece that was about 1 inch thick. So this is going to be a double-sided job. I kind of gave that away a second ago. The width of the job is going to be 19, the height is 5, the thickness of the material is going to be 1 inch thick. We're going to zero off our material surface. that's fair. Bottom left-hand corner is going to be our datum. We're going to flip bottom to top. And the biggie down here at the bottom is that we want to make sure that we have this set to a very high resolution. Because we'll be creating some 3D content, we need to have that turned up as high as we can so we get nice smooth shapes. And we'll just click OK. So the next thing we'll look at is we'll have a look at our layers. Now, again, like I had mentioned, I started this off with Peter's file. So there are all of his layers up top. And then I have my layers at the bottom, and I tried to color them the best I could after the fact. Oh, by the way, Peter told you that it was his third file that he was working on, his third version. Oh, this was actually my fourth. It took me a few kicks, different ideas, different thoughts on how I could create this thing, and then finally came up with this, which I think worked out okay in the end. And then I have all of my different layers set up with my different bits on all my different parts on it. Okay, let's have a look at the modeling tab. Now this is surprisingly an uncomplicated part when it comes to the amount of components that we need to make this. There are really only 3 on the top, and then equally if we look at the bottom side, we have 5 on the other side, and then the rest of them are made up of the actual tabs to hold it into our material. Now I haven't showed you the 3D view yet, so let's just, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide me. You don't need to see me anymore. And let's go ahead now and take a look at our 3D view of this thing, and you'll see what I came up with. So there's the shoehorn right there, from the side, from the top, and then from the bottom. Okay, you'll notice that I only have 1 tab on the top, and I have 3 on the bottom. So these only needed to be half tabs at this end, and the other one I wanted to be a full tab-ish with a squish tab. Okay, so that's why that. So, like I said a second ago, I'm going to point out the high points of this. First of all, I'm going to turn off my 2-sided view. I don't want to see both sides at the same time. I only want to see one side. So you'll see that I have just the components that make up the top of my shoehorn. And then I have this thing underneath here. And this is what I call my Wonky zero plane. So if I right click on this and I go ahead and say show only this, you'll see that I have this zero plane that I built. Now, this zero plane was derived from a line that I created through the center of the profile that Peter made his shoehorn from. You'll see it right here going along. Now, I have that same profile on the top side and on the bottom side, and that's there for a reason. So if I go to my other side for a second and I just show only my Wonky zero plane, and then we go ahead and preview our both sides, and then I go to our 3D view, you'll see nothing shows up. If I unhide this, you'll see just the back and so on. So really what I'm doing is I'm creating this plane that I can start to add components to. So if I got to my front for a second, and we start adding on my components, let's go ahead and turn this to a single-sided view. Let's hide my Wonky zero plane. I'm going to show you my main shape. So this is the main top shape of my shoehorn. Then we're going to add the dish to the bottom for your heel. And then if I add my Wonky zero plane back in there again, you see now it follows the shape of that shoehorn. So there you go. So that's that. And then I add in the tab in the end. And off we go. Let's go ahead and go to the other side for a second. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the other side for a second. And let's take a look at that. Same thing. There's my Wonky zero plane. There's my main shape. And there's my lip on the end that I'm adding there. There's a little lip, a little tail lip there we have. And then I'm adding this component right here, or this level right here. And I'm going to just briefly go over this. If I turn this on, what this does is it creates a bit more material on the back side of my shoehorn. And that's there because it wasn't quite thick enough, or I didn't feel it was thick enough. So I wanted to add that into the job. So what this is a combination of some extra material, and then I'm adding to it, or I'm using a multiply component to actually shape that down to the bottom. And so if we take a look at the 3D view here for a second, you'll see that there's my lump of material right here, the bitmap representation of it. And then this shape back here is actually the multiply component that I use. And what it is, it's a dish that tapers down to the zero plane. It's scaled to one, in this case, 1 inch tall, believe it or not, but it's 1 unit. And when I convert it into a multiply layer, what it does, the software will look at the underlying pixels, and it will multiply those by the height of the pixel of the multiply component. So when it's on the outside edge, those pixels get multiplied by 0, so nothing happens. The one in the middle, it'll work its way up, and then the one in the middle, it multiplies it by 1, so everything in the top stays at 1. So the ones on the edge go away, the ones at the top stay at 1, and everything else gets multiplied nice and smooth in between. And that gives me that extra shape that I need to go ahead and create my the back of my shoehorn. So if I go ahead now and go here, we'll go to our 3D view, and we'll take a look at that. And now I have this dome. Without that on there, it looks kind of flat. And I add that in there. We've got that in the end. Then, of course, we have our tabs to finish things off, and then off we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in 3D again. And there we have it. Now, there's one other trick that I didn't mention to you, but I'll throw it in there, is that my Wonky Zero planes, actually, if you look at these components, let's go ahead to my top side here for a sec. Let's take a look at this Wonky Zero plane and look at the component properties for it. It has a base height of minus 0.5, so half of my material thickness. And I do that to both sides of my Wonky Zero plane. That way they come together and they're right in the middle of my material where I want them to be, so that what I see is nothing when I see them both together and they line up and they become more or less this sort of building plane that I can start to add things on top of to get the shape that I want to. Now again, I know that was really quick and crazy, but if you do want me to go into a little bit more in depth, we can build this from scratch someday or something like this, maybe. We'll see. So our tool paths are pretty basic as well. We're going to go ahead and take a look at those. For the top, it's very basic. It's a two-sided part. We've got our dowel holes, we have our roughing and our finishing and our profile cuts. Pretty much the basic standard stuff that you need. We'll flip to the other side. The same deal, except for we have the wasteboard holes that we need to cut into our wasteboard first before we put our material back down again so everything lines up properly. Because it was a 2-hour challenge, I really gave myself quite an aggressive step over when it came to the finishing passes. That way I knew I'd have a little bit of sanding, but I could get rid of those little cusps with the sanding machine in the end. But I wanted to speed up the cutting time, thinking I could make up for that in the finishing. So Peter sent me that 2-hour time frame, so I had to make it all work in there. Okay, so that's that. That's my files. A few of the tips there and tricks and so on. Let's have a look at how this cut in the labs. So here I am just kind of getting ready to set this up. Everything looks good. I'm going to screw down my piece of oak that I chose to use. Now there happened to be a knot in the middle of this piece of oak, so I had to kind of avoid that by only using the left-hand side of that piece. End mill's in there. I'm ready to go to start cutting those, the roughing pass. Now what's great about this sort of thing is that I guess first of all, I cut the dowel holes in there. Sorry about that, I forgot about that. And we go into the actual roughing of it. Now, I was a bit nervous. I'm always nervous when I'm doing a two-sided part like this. It's a lot of fun to see it kind of happen. Now, there we go. See, a CNC machine is like having another set of hands in your shop. I could sit back and I can enjoy a bag of crisps or chips while it was working away and doing its thing. The roughing pass worked out really well. I was really quite happy with it, how it all went. And I swapped that in for my 1/4-inch ball nose and then went back in and did the finishing. And again, I had time to have a little drink of rhubarb soda while I was waiting. Yeah, rhubarb soda, you heard me. It's very strange. Vacuum that off, and then we're going to put in the end mill to run a profile cut around it. And that's just going to get rid of some extra material I didn't want to deal with from the other side. I really wanted this thing to be actually floating inside my material when I was all done running them. There we have it. And we're going to go ahead now and put those dowel holes inside or right into our wasteboard. Push in those dowels, then we flip this over. Now it was a really, really tight fit, but I noticed there was a bit of a warp, so I had to get up there and use a little bit of knee pressure to get that flat when I screwed it down. That did make me a bit nervous, but in the end, running these tool paths, I could tell everything worked out well in the end. Again, one of the fun things about this is being able to see your part emerge from your piece of material and it actually sitting in your material block when you're all done. It's kind of a neat thing. It's a little nerve-wracking, but it is really fun to see happen. I was really impressed with how this cut, even with the aggressive step over, it still worked out really, really well. There we have it. Put in an end mill, and we're going to run a little profile cut around there again, just to get rid of some of the extra stuff that was there that I didn't want to deal with later on. Made my edges of my shoehorn nice and straight and flat. Took that off there, and there you go. It's amazing. Every time I see it, it's really cool. Cut that out. Did a little bit of sanding, just to get rid of the tabs, and then get rid of some of that, those little cusps that were left by my aggressive step over. A little more sanding. I wasn't aware at this point of how long it was going to take, so I'm still working away at it. I put oil on it just because I couldn't wait that day for any other kind of finish to dry, so I figured I'd just put on some oil, and that way it would preserve it a little bit. Yeah, and there it is. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. It's right here, by the way. It's right here. It worked out really good. And you know what? What's really great about it is that my wife likes it. If my wife likes it, then it's got to be okay because it can stick around, which is kind of nice. I like that. So there are my times. Now the challenge was to get this into 2 hours and see if I could fit it in there. So here is my total time altogether. It is 147 minutes. And I had time in there to have a drink and some chips. That's not too bad, eh? That's pretty good. So all joking aside, I didn't add in my design time, which probably would have sent this into multiple hours. But once I have it done, it's only going to take an hour and 47 minutes every time to make one of these. But to be fair to Peter's technique, both have their pros. Every one of his are going to be handmade with respect to, they're all going to be different. Each one is individual. It's going to be a beautiful piece to give away, which is amazing. On my side of things with the CNC, I joke about having it working in the background, but of course that is a benefit, but also it's repeatable. I can customize it in different ways if I want to, and I don't have the skills like Peter does to create a beautiful piece of craft like he does. So this is where I can start, and I think overall, it worked out okay in the end. I'm pretty happy with that. So now let's go on to Peter's third video here, and then I'll be back to talk to you in a second.
Now, template writing is a very important concept, and I'm sure many of the seasoned CNC users will be aware of what I'm talking about. And the idea is that you take a writer, and in the base you put a guide bush. And that guide bush allows you to follow a template. And you may be following it on the inside or the outside. And in your writer you put a particular size cutter. And a relationship between the size of that guide bush and the size of the cutter is important. And that's where we get the concept of offsets. Now, I'll come back to that shortly. Supposing you have an object that you want to copy. It might be something that looks perhaps a little bit like this. But this is quite a complicated thing because it's got that profile on the other side. Now, ordinarily, you might think, well, I can knock those up on the CNC. Well, that's true. But what happens if someone comes to you and says, I want a template so I can make these? And you, as the CNC operator, are expected to make that template. This is how you go about it. Let me first of all take a very simple example. Suppose we want to copy this and also be able to create a hole into which it fits. So what we do is we start by measuring this. You measure it in each direction so that you can draw that shape exactly. And in Aspire or Vectric, VCarve Pro, whatever it might be, you would draw that shape. And then when you've done that, you refer to a writer offset table. And this will be made available to you at some point after today. And on there you look up the offset you can achieve with a certain size template and a certain size cutter. And you know all your sizes of cutters that you own. You know all the different sizes of templates that you might have. And from that you say, aha, I will have an offset of for example, 6 millimeters. So, having measured this in each direction, you now need to make your drawing, which is in VCarve Pro, bigger in all directions by 6 millimeters. And then you take that to the CNC and you produce your template. And you then put the correct size guide bush and cutter in your router, and you use this as a pattern to follow. You will then produce an exact copy of that. But you can go further than this. If you've chosen your offset carefully, you'll find that you've got another size guide bush, perhaps another size cutter or vice versa, and you can then use this template to make a hole which is an exact fit for the object that you've created. So with one template, you can make something that allows you to make a hole or the object itself. That is exactly the approach that I made when I created this design, which I'll show you shortly on Aspire, which allowed me then to make this hole for this to fit into. It also allowed me to actually reproduce this. And my template looked like this. Now in the video you'll see a different template because I accidentally got rid of the old one, but I made up a new one so I could show it to you today. This is the triangular shape with the offset added, and this is the circular shape with the offset added. Now because we want to do this concentrically, my template is one that can be flipped. So when I was creating this template, I first of all on the CNC produced this, then I flipped this, and then I produced that on the CNC. And those two things are concentric in reference to the two edges that's nearest to them, those two edges, like so. Then when I use this, I use the same approach. To cut out that shape, I use that template. To cut out that shape, I flip the template with my piece of stock still in the same place to do that shape. And of course, because this is a compound shape, I had to adjust the height of the cutter in the router for certain parts of the operation. Let's go straight into Aspire, where I've created the drawing for this shape as it is. Now, the reason that it's down there is that half of the template is going to be on this part of the material, and the other half will be up here. And that will be done by flipping the piece of material in the CNC between the two cuts of the tool parts. If I go back to this triangle, I need to produce an offset, and it's an offset going outwards of 9 millimeters. 9 millimeters is the offset that I'll be using when using the router to cut these shapes. And I'm going to do the same for the circle, outwards to the right, offset, and there we go. So I've now got two offset lines, one for the triangle, one for the circle. I'm selecting the triangular one. I'm now going to go to the toolpath menu, and I'm choosing a profile toolpath. I want to cut to the depth of 11 millimeters using a 6.35 millimeter cutter, which I've selected. Note you can select all sorts of parameters and change them here if you need to, about speed and rate of cut and so on and so forth. My cut needs to be on the inside. I'm not having any tabs because I'm using double-sided tape to use keep the pieces in the middle from running around. And I'm going to give this a meaningful name, triangle. And I'm now going to say 635 end mill, which reminds me what tool should be in the router when I do the cut. And there you see that cut, and that looks the right shape for my template. That's good. And after I've done this, the next thing to do is to close that and save this toolpath. When you press the save, you have the option to say what post-processor you want. Now, I do everything in G-code, but there's loads and loads of different tools which you can set the post-processor for. Mine is the Xcarve millimetric G-code. So there it is, save in the right place, that's done. So I can now close that, turn to my 2D drawing. I'm going to select the the circle to be cut out of the other part of the material. There it is. And I go to the same toolpath again. I want to do a profile toolpath. There it is. I'm going to use the same cutter, same cut depth. Everything else is the same. Inside, yep, fine, no tabs. Straight down, all I've got to do is give it a name. Now I'm going to give it a meaningful name, flip. And I need to flip my piece of material in the CNC before this cut is done. And I'm calling it flip circle 635 end mill. So I know everything about that toolpath that I need to know. And the flip reminds me to flip my material over, because otherwise I'll have what you see now, everything in the same place, which is not what I want. Now, you can just preview the one toolpath you just created. I've reset it. You can go up to this area. You could either single step through a toolpath creation, or you press the left-hand button there and you can see the whole thing done. And again, there's our circle, all nice and neat. So we'll just close that now and then remember to save it. That's G-code as before. Save the toolpath, and that's that toolpath saved. So that actually now is everything we need to do. I'm just going to do a final save in case I need to come back to this, and now we can look at getting it machined. Now in both these bits of work, the centre part of what I'm doing will be cut out, and I don't want that to go flying off. Now I could have had tabs to hold the middle bits in place, but I didn't want to have that little bit of cleaning up with sandpaper and a craft knife just to roughen up the edge in any way. So I'm using double-sided sellotape, and I'm going to stick some of it on here now, and that will hold the piece that ends up being cut out from the middle, hold it in place and stop it interfering with the rest of the cut. And that's that done. You can probably just about see the shape that's been cut out, and my piece in the middle did not come detached from the double-sided tape, thank goodness. That's the first bit of template which you can see there. There's the cutout. I'm now going to flip it like this, keeping that reference edge that side, and we've got the new reference side here. We can now send the next file. So that's sent that file, and just as last time, the centerpiece didn't come adrift, and I can now take my template out of the machine, and hopefully it's job done. And what I've done is I've stuck my workpiece down onto the sacrificial piece below it, so that means any cutouts won't move. I've got my reference edge here and the one at this end, which I'm lining up with the two edges of the piece I'm going to cut into. And it's the plug for the hole that I'm going to do first. Get this nicely lined up as accurately as I can. So that will give me a 5mm depth of cut. Now because this is a plug, I'm going to plunge down and I'm going to keep the guide all the way against the circular part of the template. Hopefully you can see I've made that circular plug which is going to stick up there. We're going to turn the template over like so, so I've still got this reference edge here and I've got the other edge here as the reference at this end. And what I've got to do is to cut away at the same depth that I've just been cutting all the material here, prior to doing a cut all the way through the material, but following the template here. Well, there it is. Right, I had one whoopsie. My router hit one of the clamps and I thought I was still pushing against the edge of the template. That wasn't the case. And you can see there's a little nick there. But other than that, I've actually made the item I was trying to make, and there it is. So there's my little gizmo which I've made. This is the plug. I'm now going to change my setup so I can do the hole that this plug will fit into. And this is a hole, so we're going to go all the way through. And just as before, I'm now going to flip the template. Yep, I'm happy with that. And this time we're taking out all of the material in the gap. Right, so there that is, and here this is. I'm going to off that down in now. And if you look carefully, there is where I had the little whoopsie as I went round with the right and I hit the clamp. But otherwise, that's a pretty neat fit. And on this other side, it's also a pretty neat fit. Well, I hope you now have some ideas of how you can make templates of your own. And remember that if you're doing a template that needs two parts, as I've shown here, that this idea of being able to flip it about a symmetrical line through there is the way to go. It then makes lining up so much easier.
Wow. So when Peter first started talking there, I was like, well, I can make all those parts with my CNC. Why do I need a template for this kind of thing? And then it hit home to me as he was speaking that, what if you had somebody out there who had a shop who didn't have a CNC, who wanted to make a part over and over and over again and need the template for that? Well, this is the perfect setup for that, a perfect example of how you could make a template for another shop, and they could make a part over and over again if they want to. So it's great. Now Peter has given us that file, again, crazy generous, and then also he's given you the router offset chart, so you can go ahead and do all the offsetting appropriately for the bushing and the tool that you're using. So again, thanks Peter for all of that, and that was a really good one. I really enjoyed that a lot. So as I said, Peter was over the top generous with all that he gave us to give to you guys, and unfortunately I couldn't fit it all in, so I had to leave this one out. It's a bookend, and this isn't a real book. It's made of wood, and neither is that a book either, but it's quite heavy. It's got a big lump of metal inside. So there'll be a link below for that to get to watch that video. And Peter does some interesting stuff with V-carving and bending material over top of other parts. Again, a mix of traditional woodworking and CNC stuff to come up with the bookend that you just saw, which is quite neat. And then of course, then he went ahead and we had this stool that he gave us. But the top, I'm going to have this as a sort of natural wavy look top. And this is the top, and it's going to go on this way up. So it's a rough piece of oak, it's not been planed. But as you can probably understand, when it goes on there, it's not going to sit down evenly. So again, there'll be a link below again for this full video that you can go see how Peter does a couple things. One is, the important one that he's showing there is how he can fixture that piece of rough timber to his CNC machine flat, so that he can put the channels in the bottom, so when he flips it over, it'll sit nice and flat on top of the legs that he's built. He also shows you how to use a piece of clip art that comes free with your software to put that nice rosette on the side. And then also he's come up with this scroll that he's given us to give away again, that you can use for all kinds of different projects. It's just a VCarve file that you can go ahead and open up into your software, and you can put it on anything you want to. So again, amazing stuff there from Peter. So once this is all done and you go over to your V&Co account, you'll be able to download the pack of, and it is a pack of content that goes along with this project. You'll see you'll get the garden stool scrolls, you'll get the router offset table, you get the TV mount, you'll get both shoehorns, his version and my version. So if you have Aspire, you can use my version. If you have VCarve Desktop Pro or Aspire, you can use his version to make your own if you'd like to. And if you do that, I'd love to see what you have. So make sure you post it socially, tag us in it, or put it in the Vectric forum so we can see that. We'd love to pass that on to Peter so he can see what you guys are doing with these files. There's the template for making the little triangle widgety thing that he made. And then there's the trolley token and then the Z clamp. So definitely one worth downloading and having a look through. And again, some of these aren't finished projects that are done on your CNC. They get you part of the way, like the Z clamp idea I mentioned earlier, where you still need to put, using traditional woodworking techniques, you need to put that little channel in there so you can bolt things down. Peter, thank you very, very much from all of us here at Vectric for putting all the time that you did into creating all of that wonderful content that you share on your site and the exclusive stuff that we have here to show today. All the files that you put together, really, it's been a pleasure. It was lots of fun doing this, and the challenge. I'm still quite excited that I made a shoehorn. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. I might have to use it, but yeah, it's great. Very cool. Thanks a lot for that, Peter. Really appreciate that a lot. So that's it for now. So until next month, I hope you come back and join us again for another live event here on the Vectric YouTube's channel. Thank you so much. Keep safe. Bye-bye.